Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 122. I'm Enigmius and today we're continuing with the Broadsword build. Last episode was all about the profiling and following through with what I promised to do, setting up profiles a little bit more extensively throughout the ship so that they're basically broken down into layers, individual rows as we work our way through it. Once the rough profiles are in place, then we just have to do a pass over the entire ship and smooth everything out. Basically, what it boils down to is the easiest way to describe it. And we're going to start with this top section here in the back. We basically got this one row. It's a big flat sheet of blocks at this point because it was quick and easy to fill in. I decided to just go for it. And now all we're really doing is looking at the outer perimeter of this shape that we've made on the very top of the ship and saying, okay, how can we smooth this out in a way that we're happy with, that kind of fits with our idea of what the overall ship should look like, without necessarily putting ourselves in a position where it becomes stressful and we become unhappy to be a part of the process. Realistically speaking, all we're working on right now is just one single row of this entire ship. It's not especially large when we think of it in those terms, but one of the things that I've found over the course of a number of different builds and a number of different voxel-based games is that sometimes it's better in the long run, in a number of different ways, to maintain the freedom, if we want, to stop working in the area of the ship where we're working and go work somewhere else because we got an idea for that spot that's more fleshed out and more specific than the area where we're currently working. If we assign arbitrary rules, and if you follow this series, you know one of the things that I talk about a lot is the decisions that we make that make the whole process less enjoyable for ourselves, and arbitrary rules is pretty much at the top of that list. And one of the arbitrary rules that sometimes people make is that they start working in an area and they should have to finish that area because they should, and that's the rule, and it's arbitrary. That's why we don't actually have a good reason for it. And it makes things, first of all, less entertaining when we're doing something that we don't necessarily want to do for the sake of satisfying a rule that doesn't need to be satisfied. But it also tends to limit the outcome. I get better results when I'm working on a spot of the ship where I have an idea for what I want to do. And the more specific that idea, the better it works out. Even if that idea doesn't survive, even if it doesn't last on the ship for more than an hour, I'm still happier and more productive, and I get better results when I'm working in an area of a ship where I have an idea that I'm enthusiastic about. And if that means bouncing all over the place sometimes and not necessarily having a unified vision for the way everything is coming together, then that's absolutely fine, because that comes as a part of the process later on when we start looking at things in terms of refining what we've already got. We're not quite there yet with this. We're almost refining in the sense that we're working in these different rows, and now we're inside, we're kind of filling in the holes, and then we're going to move to the next row down and continue that way. But all we're really doing is filling it in. There is an element of refinement to it, but not on the scale that we'll be looking at later on. Once everything is filled in and it looks like a completed ship, it's the details that we add after that sort of give the ship the flavor that distinguishes it from some of the other ships that you might see. So you can see here, just taking our time, not necessarily making a ton of progress right away, but we went inside, we filled in a bunch of stuff, and now I'm looking at the exterior and these different 90-degree angles that we want to smooth off, and how can we make that happen in ways that are interesting and possibly even unexpected. And one of those ways is to use those offset 45-degree blocks so that you can have them interacting with the 22.5-degree blocks in different ways that you might not necessarily look at first glance and say, oh, I know what's going on there. There's kind of this moment where you look at it and you say, what the hell, how can that happen? How does that shape even happen? I didn't think that was possible. And it's because we're using blocks in ways that I think not too many people use them. And it's not because we're geniuses that we've come up with all these different ways of doing things. It's because we like to experiment sometimes with different blocks and come up with different ideas to put them together. In this case, it's a very uniform and very predictable way of putting these blocks together, but you don't see it that often, and that's why it kind of has a look to it that's a little bit difficult to duplicate in any other way. So now you can see we're filling in this back section, and I've got this little tail sticking off the back, and I had this idea for what I wanted to do with it. And again, it was an example of something I got a general idea and I roughed it in as part of the profiling process, but I didn't go all the way to filling it in and completing the idea. So now when we come across it, it makes sense that we would take a look at it and figure out what we can do. Before this is done, I also want to take another look at refining the way the very top layer interacts with the layer that we're working on now, particularly in the back end of the ship, so that we come up with that refined thing that you weren't necessarily expecting. It stands out, and when you look at it, you say, that's kind of neat, as opposed to random blobs that we jam together, which we do sometimes as well, but not necessarily on purpose. So you get the idea here. We've got all of these rows on the back end that are just calling to me, because I don't even really have to think specifically about what I want to do with them. We just have to go over the cubes with the blocks that make it look less like cubes and kind of smooth it off. But I don't want that back end of the ship, like I mentioned in the last episode, I don't want it as one great big sheet that just kind of is there, because it's a little bit dull. Even if it does have kind of an interesting wavy contour to it, it's still kind of dull if we just put it together as one big sheet. So I want to keep that in mind and not necessarily rush into that portion of the process. This part here, now that we filled out what was a tail, and now we've kind of flared it out, and now I want to make sure that it makes sense with the way that it's coming together with the very top row. And the idea that I came up with kind of surprised me at just the simplicity, and also what it could do to the top of the ship when we kind of invest a little bit of time on a very, very simple detail. And it won't be long before you see it, because we just have to do a little bit of work here to get everything to fit together properly between the first and the second layer. You can see we've got this section that we're going to fill in, and then we're going to end up removing a big chunk of it later anyways. But you get the idea. It's just working with the rows and filling them in. There's never any part of it that's overwhelming when all we're doing is thinking about it in terms of rows. And then when we get ideas to make those rows interact well with each other, then we follow through with those ideas and we come up with something that's even closer to a unified vision. But this part here is where we start looking at the very top of the ship and say, I don't want a great big structure on top of the ship. I don't want something that dominates your view and distracts you from everything else that could or could not be going on with the design of the rest of the ship. But at the same time, right now it's a big flat open area on the top of the ship, and it's conspicuous in its lack of interesting things going on, I guess you could say. So we're going to have one of my favorite things to put on ships for arbitrary reasons. That's a great big vent sitting on the top of the ship, gathering whatever it's gathering. It makes a little bit more sense in a small vessel than it does on a capital vessel, because you do spend a lot of time on planets that probably have some kind of atmosphere that you're wanting to channel to various different parts of your ship for whatever reason. We don't really need necessarily the best reason to put a vent on our ship somewhere, but it helps if we can, put something together in our imagination. It's not a complicated structure, but you see we've got some curves going on, some subtle curves, making things a little bit more interesting. And then all of those blocks that I just put there are being removed because I want to make sure that everything fits together. The last thing that I wanted to do here, we've got sort of nice rounded curves going on in the back and on the front, just the way we put everything together. And then we've got these 90-degree angles together on the sides. And the only thing that came to mind that would work actually surprised me, and I'm glad that it came to mind, because I could have actually overlooked the opportunity altogether, is to use the cylinders and the different 90-degree blocks that we have access to with those cylinders. And it gives a round appearance to the sides, even though the sides themselves aren't round, but the cylinders are. So I'll let you see that going into place. The next episode, we're going to continue with the refining of the profiles. And if you want to be notified about the next episode and future episodes, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.